Well, I'm Buddy Sullivan, and I'm here to talk about a series of new books that I've done. And I have been reading about the history of this county, McIntosh County, all of my life since childhood. And some years ago, 30 odd years ago, I began doing serious research on the history of the county and published a few books, mainly the early days on the Georgia Tidewater, which is the official county history, as they sometimes call it. But over the years, I have expanded my work and gotten more specialized on particular topics of history, such as Sapelo Island and Harris Neck and Darien and Butler Island. And it has become somewhat of a passion with me. Sometime in early 2019, I had an idea that we needed a fresh book, not necessarily a better book, but a fresh book about Thomas Spalding of Sapelo Island. And Thomas Spalding, very well known locally and statewide as one of the leading agriculturists. He was known as a very benevolent slave owner. As unfortunate as slavery was, at least Spalding was one of the better ones, as we might say. But I wrote a new book on him, and the idea just sort of took off from there with the Spalding book. And I said, well, I'm doing that, so how about some other books on other topics? So some other titles followed, such as a book about Butler Island and the rice economy of the Altamaha Delta. Was another book bringing Butler Island through its various processes of ownership with the Butler family and then subsequent owners. And then a little book that I did was Blackbeard Island. The island had never had a book about it per se on its history, so I did that. And so these little books came out as sort of an extension of the work that I had already done. These books are really an expansion of the work that I have done in my other books. The consolidation of material in, say, the Early Days book has been expanded and added to in this whole series of books. So the Early Days book, I believe, ended up being about 900 pages of local history. But then you add all the pages of history in these books, and it's probably in excess of maybe 2,000 pages. So you can see that I've expanded, although a lot of the material is already in some of the other books. So it's like sort of a whole new thing for people that don't, I'm looking at people that may have bought an early edition of the First County History, the Tidewater book, the Early Days book, but haven't gotten anything else since then. Well, now they can do that because they have different subjects of local history and can get the detail and the depth of information that they didn't have in the earlier editions of the county history. So those are the first four. I kind of got taken off on that, and then I just said, when the pandemic hit, I said I needed some projects. We're all at home, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, let's think about this. Let me just, I'm working at home and doing research, and I've got the internet. The pandemic at least didn't shut down the internet, so we can still do research. So I decided to go ahead and expand this into a larger series, and now we have a 9-volume series after the first 4 volumes came out in 2019. And the most recent 5 volumes are again, the foundation of the work is in the Early Days book, but it's expanded in these new 5 books. And I think probably the foundation book is the history of Darien. This book is the most comprehensive history of Darien, as far as I know, that's ever been done by anyone. I know my early mentor, Bessie Lewis. Bessie Lewis wrote some monographs on the history of Darien, but she was never able to write a detailed, comprehensive book about Darien as she always wanted to. So we have here about a 550-page book on the history of Darien. As I say in the foreword to this book, it's largely an economic history. It's not a social history. It's primarily economic, about how the town has risen and fallen on the tides of economy and depressions and war and so many different factors that have affected the history of the town. And I think it's very comprehensive, and it's very suitable for serious research, for students, for others doing research on the history of Darien and McIntosh County. I will add that all of these books are thoroughly documented. I've always been a big believer in footnotes, and I do footnotes in my books. People sometimes say, I love your footnotes. They're sometimes more interesting than the text because I add additional information in a lot of the footnotes that really is not directly pertinent to what's in the text, but it fits fine in a footnote. So those little nuggets of information are valuable for a lot of people who are seriously into this. An extension of the Darien book, and these are all related, of course, is a book that I got an idea on to do a book on the early families of McIntosh County, a consolidation of the early families who came to this coastal Georgia area going back to the Highlanders of Scotland. And so hence you see a picture of Lachlan McIntosh gracing the cover of this early families book. And this is an interesting book. It's really largely extrapolated on individual families from all of my other books. And I've consolidated the information in separate chapters on families like the McIntoshes and the Hopkins and the Atwoods and the Genlats and on and on and on, the Troops and the Dents and the Brailsfords. So that's what this book is. I think it would be of interest mainly to genealogical researchers and people interested in genealogy. Another book, Harris Neck. Harris Neck has been a source of great interest to me over the years, and we have a lot of our friends that live in the Harris Neck area of McIntosh County and Lower Liberty County, contiguous to Harris Neck. So I did a separate volume on Harris Neck with the various aspects of the dynamics of land use and landscape. Another book, Postbellum Sapelo Island. This is a book that I've sort of been working on as a labor of love probably for 20 years. This is largely built around the events on Sapelo after the Civil War. Much of this book entails the African American evolution of land use and settlement after the Civil War, where the freed people of Sapelo and other areas came to Sapelo, bought property, and developed their own independent communities, such as Raccoon Bluff and Hog Hammock and Shell Hammock and others. So Postbellum Sapelo is probably the most extensive study of that particular period of time from 1865 to the time of the arrival of Howard Coffin in 1912. And it also incorporates the journal of Archibald McKinley, who documented the day-to-day life on Sapelo of the remaining descendants of Thomas Spalding, who continued to live on Sapelo after the Civil War. And so I built the book around that and did that largely with the blessing of the descendants of Archibald McKinley, who live in Milledgeville, and they were very enthusiastic about me reissuing the McKinley Journal with additional footnoting and people identification and that sort of thing. I think it's important to remember that all of my books, I think we hear this word diversity a lot of times, but I think my books incorporate a lot of diversity, where I do cover the African American community, I cover the Native American community, even the Spanish presence on our shores in the 16th and 17th centuries. And so I've tried to touch on all aspects of these communities throughout the entire series of books, and I think there's probably something of interest for everybody that's incorporated into these books.